Now you listen to me, and you listen good.
And what's that gonna cost me?
Forspoken is a lot of things, and I'll tell you exactly what it is in a second. But before I begin this choo-choo train, I want to make something clear. There's been a lot of talk and a lot of hate surrounding Forspoken's dialogue, about it being so Marvel-esque you can cut your teeth on it. And this is for the most part correct.
Such certitude, such righteous poise, yet all is demon solid noise.
Shit, alright, if you're gonna rhyme everything, then just kill me now.
The dialogue is, for the most part, rather disgustingly on the nose and self-aware. It often doesn't take itself very seriously, and I'll get back to this a bit later. That being said, and I wanted to make this clear because the main character, who's been the target of a lot of this hate due to her delivering the lines, is voiced by an incredibly talented actress. Frey Holland, voiced by Ella Balinska, is incredibly well voiced, and the same goes for our companion Cuff, and honestly every other voice actor in the game. Somehow, Forspoken has managed to couple some of the most boring dialogue in gaming with some of the best voice acting. And before I went on, I just wanted to point that out.
Great start.
And now, let's speak Forspoken.
Hide.
Is that a dragon?
Shh, don't let it see you.
You think?
In the past decade, Square Enix has tried to make and allowed for a certain vision of their games to trump everything else. Namely the idea of a fluid, real-time battle system and flashy movement or traversal systems. Whether we're talking Kingdom Hearts 3 where both fighting in the air, sliding around, or even running up walls is suddenly a thing, or Final Fantasy 15 where hacking and slashing combined with rolling and sometimes even teleporting is encouraged, this focus almost seems to inherently take away from the rest of Square Enix's games. And I don't know why. It just seems that by now, it's a rule that extremely flashy and gravity-defying gameplay equals half-assed Square Enix games, and especially if they take place in a mostly open world. Enter Forspoken.
Not what I was expecting.
A game Square Enix has teased for the better part of a decade, delayed time and time again, and which I only remembered was a thing until about a week ago. But that's not entirely Forspoken's fault alone. Poor marketing on the part of Square and a terrible, weird and vague name, Forspoken, hasn't really put this game on the map. That is, until Twitter began hating on the dialogue. Either way, Forspoken is the story of Frey, a young New Yorker who has just about nothing going for her. From almost landing indefinitely in jail, to being near murdered by her former street gang, Frey is a former foster child whose only real friend in this world is her cat Homer, who both live in a run-down apartment. Frey's plan is to run away from everything and everyone the next day, having evidently saved up a gym bag's worth of life savings. And let's stop right here, because even though we've just watched scenes like this...
Hey, Lisa! Lisa? Really? I thought she was Lisa.
That's Chrissy!
Huh. Well, in my defense, you don't really look like a Lisa.
and ran a horribly dull chase scene down an ugly alley, this scene right here was actually moving.
I just can't wait for clean air, bright skies. No more chases, no more cops, no more fights. Tomorrow. One more sleep, and we are out of here. Can't wait to be any other place but this.
I'll chalk it down to the fantastic voice acting skills of Ella Balinska, and give credits to the animators, because this is actually fantastic and deeply emotional. This whole thing is sadly undercut by the fact that our apartment is soon set on fire by the previously mentioned gang, and Frey can't find her cat. What follows is the single most frustrating thing in gaming history. Frey is now narratively given the choice of either saving her cat or her money first. But the player isn't given a choice at all. We go after the cat, but once we do, the money is lost behind a burning door. But here's the thing, for the player, this makes no sense. We can literally interact with the money bag, but Frey will just not pick it up and then go look for her cat. This is insane and just destroys the entire premise of the tension, and could have been fixed by her simply tucking her bag away somewhere out of sight the night before or something. And this lack of tension is pretty emblematic of the rest of the Forspoken experience. Even more down on her luck after giving up her cat and now without any money or shelter whatsoever, she happens upon a golden gauntlet of sorts, which magically transports her to another world. Not only is everything magical looking, but the armband speaks, or as Frey names it, Cuff.
Where on earth is this?
Athea?
Who's there?
And technically not Earth. Well, not what you would call Earth, anyway.
I swear to God, asshole, show yourself!
Show myself? I've shown. I'm showing. I can't get more showed. Show myself indeed.
This finally kicks off our adventure, and we quickly come to learn that not only is this place arguably far more dangerous than New York, but it's getting more dangerous by the second. Civilization is corrupted and dying outside of the last remaining city, Sepal. Luckily, Cuff affords magical powers and the ability to run really fast and jump over objects, which does come in handy. Through a series of events, Frey becomes the chosen hero that must stand up against the corruption of the land, called the Break, and to defeat the Harbingers of the Break, overcoming both physical and personal challenges along the way. In all ways that matter, Forspoken tells a fish out of water story, or an example of the Japanese isekai story. In other words, a person is transported to another world, where they must survive and make sense of things. The problem with this type of story is that they are extremely high risk, high reward, and therefore difficult to pull off. They occur to various degrees, of course, but in world-altering scenarios, Square has tried and pulled them off successfully at least twice before, in Final Fantasy X and the original Kingdom Hearts. But the thing about those games were that they were both original, and that the former was extremely mature, and the latter mostly for kids. They both leaned heavily on their strengths of genuine and heartfelt writing, and understood who their audiences were. The problem with Forspoken is that the isekai thing never really works in the beginning, which in my opinion is the most important part, as it forms the basis of the character's identity and meeting with the new environment. In Final Fantasy X, actual hours pass by before Tidus accepts that he's finding himself 1,000 years in the future. Or does he? But in Forspoken, Frey is immediately almost as comfortable in the world of Athea as she is in the United States, which admittedly is a f***ed up place on its own. She does make a point out of being shocked and whatnot, but for a person who just lost both her life savings and had to give up the only thing she loved in the world, only to find herself lost and alone, except for a talking vambrace, in a world that desperately wants her dead, I would have liked more processing time, honestly, because it just doesn't feel right that Frey is as confident and as cocky as she is. Plus, for a person who's completely alone without food, people, or money, and who fully relies on her new friend Cuff for survival, it's just not believable that she will start right off the bat by being antagonistic towards him. Admittedly, the banter does go back and forth. I think a good analogy for this duo is Mulan and Mushu, i.e. the protagonist and the mascot, where the banter also goes back and forth. But the difference is that Mulan is never completely alone, and even though she does find herself in a fish out of water story, she's not 100% reliant on Mushu for her strength or her survival. If anything, Frey and Cuff's relationship should have developed kind of like Ratchet and Clank's, where they're dependent on each other, talking perhaps some friendly banter while liking each other more and more, and only later begin to see the relationship sour somewhat. This also goes for how Frey relates to the rest of the world. Sure, she makes it abundantly clear that she wants to go home, but she does acclimate to her new surroundings in absolutely no time, which is just so jarring for a person who's supposed to be a 21-year-old whose life is going down the drain fast. I do like how she reacts to the initial ordering of her execution though, which again is very well acted.
It's because she and the corruption are one and the same. We must execute her immediately!
Wait, what? No, that's crazy. I don't even know how I got here. Please, listen to me.
And acting really is the saving grace of Forspoken. This game has some genuinely amazing acting, which turns otherwise cringy or uninspired scenes into so much more. When Frey finds an old man who's lost his mind from being exposed to the corruption, but is also the only one who can help her return to her world, this scene plays out.
I am so far from home. I'm trying to get back. I fell through a
Whoosh!
Yeah, a whoosh. Yeah, I gotta get back to where I gotta be through a whoosh.
Whoosh! You will get back to where you need to be. Whoosh!
Yes, whoosh!
I don't know, it just really manages to tip the scales from awkward to truly endearing, and I appreciate that a lot. There are scenes like these scattered about Forspoken which does elevate the experience now and then, but they are admittedly rather rare. But again, it's never the voice actor's fault. I actually like Cuff and I believe he delivers his lines excellently.
Wow, quite a crowd.
The mob mentality. Disgraceful.
The problem, as it so often comes down to, is the writing. Forspoken is written as a Marvel movie, where the protagonist has little reverence for the people around them, and who continues to be themselves throughout the story no matter what happens.
And her gifts do not end there. She is a leader under whose unflinching discipline whole armies cower. Her mere presence on the battlefield is enough to strike terror into the hearts of her enemies.
Okay, I get it. She's one stone-cold, badass bitch.
You trespassed upon her realm. You are a threat, and as such, are not to be tolerated.
Just because I walked over some imaginary line? Shit, should've brought a passport.
Frey swears, like a lot.
In case you forgot, I'm on my way to battle a boss bitch tomorrow. Fuck!
She uses modern American slang in a medieval British world.
Now you look like one of us. But your shoes betray you.
These have gotten me out of a lot of scrapes. Where I go, they go. The kicks stay.
And does very little to actually fit in or show respect for this world's important people. This only really helps to lessen my sense of immersion. Because if Frey doesn't take this world seriously, why should I? Which is ironically a point made in the game itself.
Makes sense.
What? Excuse me? I just told you and you look at me like I've done the fucking dishes?
Well, you clearly don't think much of so why should I?
Much of the bad dialogue you'll be hearing comes from the interplay between Frey and Cuff, where again, it's mostly boring banter which never turns into charming or endearing or even funny banter. It comes to a point where you just might be better turning the chatter off in the settings. Or, where once again, Square Enix does what it does best, and points out how awful its own game is.
And this time, let's try to be less petulant and annoying, alright?
I'm hardly petulant and annoying.
Agree to disagree.
I don't know why they keep doing that. Just like when Cloud comments on how awful the cat finding mission in Final Fantasy VII Remake is.
I'm looking for cats. This sucks. Screw this.
There are by now several clips circulating on Twitter surrounding cringe lines, and I will say I am absolutely sick of the Marvel lack of reverence ethos. One example is right after Frey gets her powers, and she points out the obvious.
Did I just do that?
Well, definitely with my assistance.
I did not just do that.
We did.
I just moved shit with my mind.
Perhaps our connection has somehow awoken some abilities.
I just moved shit with my mind.
I just keep hearing I.
I just moved shit with my freaking mind! Yeah, okay, that is something I do now. I do magic, talk to sentient cuffs, kill jacked up beasts. You know what? I'll probably fly next.
Now you're just being ridiculous.
Again, the delivery is actually really good, but the line itself is of the kind I'm just sick of. Forspoken's humor is generally dry, and one where the characters point out the obvious, to an absurd extent. This can be funny, but it sadly rarely is, and I think it comes down to the fact that the humor is just never actually smart. Now, full disclaimer, I'm a guy who loves Rick and Morty, and by extension, the humor in High on Life. In that game, the obvious is pointed out all the time to an absurd and over-the-top extent. But the difference is that the humor in High on Life is largely sarcastic and self-aware. Again, let me repeat that. What's funny in High on Life is the meta perspective of the jokes. The fact that they are so mundane things to say and delivered in such a caricature-like way. And it means that what I'm actually laughing at is the humor itself, not the jokes.
Hey, kid, excuse me, can we get we need to make our way into the slums, please?
No. Hold on. So you really want to get into the slums, huh?
Welcome to the slums, fresh meat.
Whoa, what are you doing? Come on, he's just a kid. Don't shoot him.
You must have met my son. He calls everyone fresh meat. Thanks for not shooting him. Things have been really hard since his annoying dad got shot and killed. It's been hard because even though my annoying husband is gone, my son is still so annoying too. So go ahead and kill him if you really want to. I'm not gonna stop you. I'd love to not have any annoying family members left.
In Forspoken, the jokes themselves are meant to be funny, not the humor. And because the jokes mostly aren't funny, and because these types of jokes are so overplayed elsewhere, it just doesn't work for the most part.
It is quite beautiful.
Yeah. In everything here wants to kill you kind of way.
No, I just mean that even amongst the madness, there's a sort of delicate grace. Destruction and corruption are forms of creation in themselves.
Wow. You sound like a serial killer.
What?
Destruction and corruption are beautiful forms of creation in themselves.
I don't sound like that.
You absolutely sound like that.
Oh no, you absolutely sound like that. Yeah, see? Two can play at that game.
You're fucking stupid.
And talking about being overplayed, Forspoken also has a story. First of all, as has been made evident, the story of a person being taken to another world where they have to fight the darkness is not a new one. And Forspoken makes this absolutely clear by almost constantly shoving Alice in the Wonderland down our dry-ass throats.
Curiouser and curiouser, cried Alice. Wish I could find that rabbit hole and tumble away to Wonderland.
Forspoken does very little new in this regard, and tells an extremely basic story with admittedly some late-game twists. But when you realize that the main story can be completed in about 10 hours, it really says a lot about how shallow and generic this game is. Forspoken is made by the same team that made Final Fantasy 15, and that is the real curse of this game. Because when it comes down to it, both of these games just utterly fail at what Square Enix used to be so good at: characters, world building, and story. Forspoken has some amazing character designs to be sure, but apart from that, there's little that truly enchants me. Just like Final Fantasy 15, Forspoken's world seems so massive at the beginning, and admittedly, it is large in a square kilometer sense, but the world is downright boring, oh so ugly to look at, and what's worse, just utterly bland and devoid of life and charm. For a game that's supposedly one of the most demanding games to ever have been made, and which even makes my PS5 gasp for air, Forspoken is ugly. Our hub city is cool in concept, but awful in execution, as it only serves up some empty streets and government buildings which somehow look very PS3-ish. I don't know, there's just something about this place that doesn't seem finished. The fact that we only really have one hub area just screams how limited this feels, as the one we have is so bland, contains virtually all of our main characters, and doesn't even seem appropriately sized for the universe. This is the only remaining human settlement and has been so for the better part of 2 decades, but it is tiny. This is supposed to be a massive cemetery because everyone who ever dies anymore is buried here, but all I'm seeing is about a dozen graves. What I mean to say by this is that it feels like Luminuous Productions, which is Square Enix studio that made Final Fantasy 15 and Forspoken, doesn't know how to make stories fit into their worlds, or perhaps have their worlds fit into their stories. Forspoken's world is just too large for its story, and similarly, its story is much too small for its lore. I'm seeing this, and I'm expecting something truly grand, like a 30-hour mainline story I can completely lose myself in, with 5 to 10 characters I'll come to love and remember. Instead, Forspoken offers a generic 10-hour mainline story, perhaps 5 characters I simply remember the names of, and only 1 or 2 I like just a little. What makes everything worse is how poorly the story is delivered. So much exposition is delivered through in-game lore books you pick up along the way, and because the game is so short, you never really come to deeply care for anyone. I can have all the sympathy in the world for Frey, and honestly, I had the most sympathy for her in the first 15 minutes, when she actually showed vulnerability and we only focused on her. But all these other characters, the good guy council, the generic bad guys, which in this game are bad lasses and are honestly the better part of the game, I just don't really care that much. I've seen this story so many times, and Forspoken does so little to change things up that I just wanted it to end after the first 2 hours. What makes things even more unbearable is how absolutely outdated and sluggish the non-combat gameplay is. If you want to indulge the game and actually have an interesting talk with Cuff, you're seriously not allowed to move around. You have to wait for minutes on end for the conversation to end, which is just absolutely horrendous game design in a game that relies on snappy movement and the feeling of being agile at all times. The same goes for virtually every interaction or transition from one scene to the next, where you either can't move or a few whole seconds go by before you can. Indeed, what's possibly worse are the game's transitions. God of War got a lot of praise in its day for never actually cutting away from a scene, but being one enormous cut the entire game. This is supposed to make the game feel conjoined and to never take you out of the experience. Forspoken does the opposite. If you do almost anything related to the story, it will cut to black for a few moments, then move the story along until it's where it wants you to be. This cutting takes away so many transitionary scenes that are vital for immersion and for creating empathy with characters, because scenes that might show the quiet moments, or how a character got in a certain situation, are just faded into black. This, perhaps more than anything, makes Forspoken feel rushed despite being delayed time and time again, and combined with such a bland open world, a forgetting and boring story, and characters that are just not very likable, Forspoken is given no chance to actually shine. The only place the game can be said to show some sparks though, is in its traversal and combat. Frey moves quickly over wide distances by using her powers, in what is likely Luminosity's best iteration yet. It feels snappy and interesting for the most part, especially when the running and jumping are combined in certain impressive environments. This traversal system is also closely tied to the combat system, which is also fast-paced and action-filled, and arguably Forspoken's biggest selling point. Frey learns more and more tricks as we go, and if you feel like the game begins rather boringly, you're not alone. Because in my opinion, Forspoken's combat system is only as good as it feels powerful and fluid, and sadly, the beginning half of the game is also the worst when it comes to how fun this is. Tossing rocks is not nearly as fun as shooting lightning or summoning a wall of fire to consume your enemies all at once, and as the game continues on, Frey's powers feel all the better. When jumps and dodges turn into counterattacks and what have you, this system can feel really great, but I will say that it also can, at least on higher difficulties, turn into something of a button mash fest. See, the key to a fun action-based combat system is when the player feels powerful, or when generic encounters are over relatively quickly. This is why Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 were so great, but why Kingdom Hearts 3 fails miserably. The encounters just end up being too long and too much of the same. In Forspoken's case, where the only button used for normal attacks is the R2 button, and where enemy health bars keeps increasing, there ends up being a whole lot of doing the same stuff. I do like that as you level up stats, holding the button charges up the power, unleashing a more powerful version of it. It actually feels really great to unleash. The only problem, again, is how many times the game demands that you do it before an encounter is over. Once again, Luminosity takes an idea from Final Fantasy 15, as in the case of potions. If you stock up on potions and play the game normally and level up, it's almost impossible to die in this game because of how safe the potions make you. And I guess I wished it relied solely on some kind of healing magic system instead. I do like the idea of this movement system though, but I don't think it's executed optimally. Just like with Kingdom Hearts 3's wall running, it feels like the movement system compensates for something else, something that's missing. And even though it's much better executed in Forspoken, where it's actually an integral part of the game, I will say the movement system highlights how badly designed the open world is. Despite being large, it never feels interesting or like something I ever want to see more of, and the colors and lighting are just never exactly right. Making bland open worlds is Luminosity's trademark, it seems, and although it was relatively cool in Final Fantasy XV to see the crumbling half-circle rock formation in that game, the fact that the same thing has made it all the way into Forspoken just rubs me the wrong way. I swear man, Final Fantasy XV gave me PTSD. Even in the world's most closed-off areas, like its crumbling cities, there's just something off, something uncanny about everything, as if the game looks like an MMO without actually being an MMO. I don't know how else to explain it exactly. Everything's just so weirdly placed and spaced out. Very little looks like what an actual city or wide open fields would look like. I get that it's a fantasy world, but immersion is always important. The open world offers various activities, but they're never inviting, never interesting, and they end up feeling like chores more than anything else. On the other hand, the game's music can be really good, but it's weird to me that the open world soundtrack focuses so much on being scary and eerie. Even one of the game's most beautiful areas sounds like this. And it's just not right. In the end, Forspoken commits the ultimate crime. It's boring, it's painfully mediocre, with just a few bright spots sprinkled in here and there, and cements Square Enix as a has-been studio. The dialogue isn't as bad as some would have it, but it's certainly only great on occasion, and for the most part extremely forgettable. I do love it when endearing scenes actually show up though, and it's mostly owed to the voice acting skills that shine through everything else.
Catch! Whoa! What is this? And who are you?
I'm the archivist. Auden told me you were clever. How do you not know what a book is?
No, I know what a book is. You don't look like an archivist.
You don't look like a hero.
That's because I'm not.
I used to be a blacksmith before. Built weapons for the very woman that raided our city. She and I were quite close. She trusted me, and I trusted her.
Sorry.
No matter, it was another time. She was another woman, as was I. Keep up!
Is everybody in this town batshit crazy?
For a game whose recommended settings demands an RTX 3070, Forspoken is ugly and so bland looking, despite definitely showing some great visual effects and certain realistic faces here and there. But often, it ends up looking like a polished but different version of Final Fantasy XV, and now more than a 6-year-old title. And that is just disappointing, especially when the performance is lacking as well. The combat and traversal systems are the game's best aspects, but they're not without their faults. And again, when all else fails, these aspects kind of feel like gimmicks in a game that doesn't really feel comfortable in its own shoes. Forspoken once again shows that Luminuous Studios doesn't know how to direct a game, doesn't know how to create relatable characters or lasting worlds, and shows that it's completely obsessed with and possessed by the idea of creating a game that feels like Final Fantasy Advent Children or something. And once again, they failed at the most important thing, to make a game that feels like it has soul.
Bingo!
Cheers.